Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Chris Cochran. Thank you for joining ProsperOps today on Supercharging AWS savings plans. Just to sort of kick things off, I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of ProsperOps. ProsperOps is an AIOps service for AWS cost optimization. And we manage commitments on over $300 million of AWS compute for our customers. Before my time at ProsperOps, I was the CEO of Chargify, and prior to that, I was with Rackspace, which is a large managed hosting and cloud services company. And there, myself as well as my two co-founders started Rackspace's AWS managed service business. So we had a chance to experiment with all the different tools, all the different cost optimization approaches for AWS, and developed strong opinionation during that time that while cost optimization is a massive scope of work, there were certain problems that could be solved with computer science in an absolutely superior way than using humans armed with great reports and recommendations. Now, for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to focus primarily on what we call the financial optimization universe of the broader cost optimization space. Obviously, there's a lot of cost optimization tactics companies can and should work through. We'll leave off the engineering optimization universe on the left side of this page for another conversation and hone in on the financial optimization universe. Specifically, we're going to talk about savings plans. Now, there's two types of savings plans. There's the compute savings plan and the EC2 instance savings plan. These were both introduced in the 2019 reInvent. And we're going to actually hold EC2 instance savings plans off from this discussion. We recently just published a blog post about the EC2 instance savings plan relative to its predecessor, the standard reserve instance. You can check that out. And what we've concluded is that aside from one specific use case that you may or may not fall into, the standard RI is actually a superior savings instrument than its successor, the EC2 instance savings plan. So if you're interested in learning more about that and whether you fall into that particular use case that makes the EC2 instance savings plan appropriate, you can check that out on our blog site. But today we're going to focus on the compute savings plan. We love the compute savings plan for a variety of reasons. First of all, it is a global commitment. So you make that commitment in dollars. It is a commitment that will float around to any region where you are running usage, which is particularly useful. It's also the only AWS savings instrument that not only covers EC2, but also Fargate and Lambda. So it gives you a lot of optionality from that perspective. When compute savings plans were released, I think the impression was that this is the easy button. And now that you can just very easily procure a compute savings plan, your financial optimization challenges should be resolved and it's off to the races. Today, we're going to make an argument that compute savings plans are a big part of your financial optimization strategy, but there are ways that you can incrementally add to the compute savings plan that will allow you to save more and also offset some of the limitations of the compute savings plan. So let's just talk first about the nature of financial optimization and the problems inherent to the different tools and approaches that are out there today. We tend to think about it in three ways. First, infrastructure volatility is always an issue, and that could be a function of whether you're consuming more amounts of compute, decreasing compute, moving from EC2 to Spot as an example, switching between instance families, converting from EC2 to Fargate, moving to containers. All of these things create volatility in the average company's infrastructure into the future. Many of those changes, it's difficult to understand their true impact, certainly from the present with regards to what compute will look like in the future. So infrastructure volatility is always a wild card that makes the financial optimization activity difficult. We'd also argue that that instead of being the easy button, which the compute savings plans certainly have been positioned as, that management complexity of these financial instruments is still there. You can think about that really in two ways. Number one is compute savings plans are subject to a very specific set of rules about how they apply. Many of those rules are very favorable. They will always apply to the highest discounted instances that are running in your environment. However, there are certain rules that sort of limit how they are applied. So, for example, a compute savings plan running an account with other compute resources will apply to that to the resources in that account first, and that will include all the resources, even if some of the discounts in that are available on the resources in that account are lower than the discounts that are available in resources running in other accounts. And what we've seen so far from AWS is that they are resistant to going and moving a savings plan once deployed in an account to another account. And so, you've got to be thoughtful about how you go and structure these commitments. In addition, the actual capacity planning of compute savings plans is a little complicated as well. When you make this commitment, you make it in post-discount dollars. And one of my colleagues sort of likened it to an analogy where you walk into a retail store and you want to buy a gift card, and you're going to be in this retail store. You're going to be buying things. You're going to be returning things. You're going to be exchanging things for the near future, and everything in the store has a different discount associated with it, and you have no idea what your needs will be a day from now, 2 weeks from now, 6 months from now. And the question is, how much do you put on the gift card? And that's a little bit of the same challenge today with the commitment planning aspect of the compute savings plan with regards to figuring that out in something that's a little bit abstract, this idea of post-discount dollars. The third thing we find that's a little bit challenging is that the compute savings plan, while obviously one of the newest financial instruments made available by AWS, it is absolutely an immutable commitment, which creates risk for you with their use. And you can think about that risk. And what I mean by that is that when you procure these instruments, they are full 12-month or 36-month terms. And once you make that dollar per hour post-discount equivalent commitment, you're going to have that commitment for the duration of that term. And you have no recourse to unwind, change, or modify up or down that commitment once it's been made. So, all of these situations sort of lead to overall complexity in the use of these financial tools. And ultimately, we see the ramifications of this complexity in the data when we look at customers. And what I'm showing you on this page is a scatter plot of different prospects that ProsperOps has talked to. I think we have something like 1,800 data points plotted on this chart. And on the x-axis, we are showing $100,000 per month increments of compute spend per month. So think EC2, Fargate, and Lambda, and the x-axis starts at $0 and goes all the way up to $600,000 per month of compute spend. On the y-axis, we have an ROI metric that ProsperOps has developed called the effective savings rate. And the way to think about the effective savings rate is it answers the question when all optimization aspects are taken into account. Things like, do I have perfect utilization or subutilization? Do I have high levels of coverage or low levels of coverage? What type of discounts am I getting based on the fact that I'm running Linux versus Windows, or using a 1-year instrument versus a 3-year instrument, or all upfront prepayment versus no upfront prepayment? All of those items are wrapped together, and ultimately the effective savings rate answers the question, when it's all said and done, what is the aggregate discount that I am receiving off the on-demand rate across my global compute footprint? So it's a true ROI metric. And you can see here on the y-axis, it starts as low as minus 20%. The way to think about that is a negative effective savings rate means that instead of actually getting a discount on your compute, you are actually paying a premium because the use of the instruments has resulted in costs that exceed what you would have spent if you had just kept everything on demand. And on the high end, you see it goes up to 60%. And while AWS will market that there will be discounts of 60 to 70% available with the use of these financial tools, they generally end up being some obscure instance in a lightly trafficked region, not something that the majority of the customers will end up running. And so, just walking through what we show on this page here, as you can see in this bottom red bubble labeled savings loss, this is the population. This is generally folks that are spending, let's say, under $50,000 a month on compute. And the challenge of using these instruments has been such that they are in a negative effective savings rate situation, and they're actually paying a premium. This next bubble, titled no savings, are folks that are either just foregoing the use of these financial instruments altogether, or they're using them in such a sparse way that any suboptimization that's happening in their use of these instruments is effectively washing out. So they're paying the on-demand rate for all intents and purposes. Now, this bubble in yellow labeled suboptimal savings is where it gets interesting. You can see here that this covers companies that are spending several $100,000 per month on compute. And these are larger companies. You can assume very sophisticated optimization shops, potentially having COEs, FinOps analysts using third-party cloud management platforms, really folks that are putting time to go in solving the optimization problem. And what we find is that largely most of those companies, even with that emphasis on financial optimization, are achieving overall effective savings rates in the teens, certainly less than 20%. In fact, you've got to be in the 75th percentile or better to be achieving discounts greater than 20%. And with ProsperOps, what our goal is to do, one of the things that we do is we want to raise your effective savings rate, and we want to drive it up into the 98th percentile. And you can think of the 98th percentile of AWS optimizers as companies that are saving and have a discount, an overall effective savings rate discount in excess of 40+%. And obviously that is all done net of any charge from ProsperOps. And so the savings impact can be quite material by shifting your ESR from wherever it exists today up to sort of the 98th percentile. So, back to the original premise, we talked about the challenges of using these financial instruments that we see in the space, and how, we don't see the easy button argument as actually playing out in the data, certainly across this subset of users. So let's go and understand specifically, why is this happening, right? How with the advent of one-click compute savings plans and good tooling and recommendations, et cetera, why is it that the effective savings rates tend to be, somewhere in the sub 20%? And what we see gets back to the limitations of the compute savings plan. When you procure these instruments, once again, they are fixed term, 12 or 36 month. And, once you make that dollar per hour commitment, you are, subject to it for the length of that term. So what we find in general is that because these instruments are complicated to plan for, and because they incur risk, that most people end up on the left-hand side of this page, where if you can think about their usage as this purple line going up and to the right, and these commitment instruments, and I've just shown here sort of what we see in the space, largely folks transitioning out of reserved instances, maybe into savings plans. So reserved instances shown here in yellow, savings plans shown here in green. Because of all these complicating factors, most companies will end up going and being very conservative in the commitment that they make, leaving most of their compute usage subject to the on-demand rate. And the more on-demand usage you have, obviously the greater the impact to your effective savings rate, and obviously an unfavorable way. And so, we see this in the majority of customers that we talk to. In fact, we're members of the FinOps Foundation, and the FinOps Foundation recently surveyed their base of members to understand where they were in their overall coverage in terms of using these commitment instruments relative to usage. And what came back from the survey was that while most of the members were aspiring to achieve something like 80% coverage of their usage with these financial commitments, in actuality, 60% coverage was more what people were actually able to achieve. And we think that's directly tied back to the challenges we mentioned in the previous slide: infrastructure volatility, the complexity of trying to properly plan these instruments, and then the rigidity and the risk incurred with their use. On the right-hand side of the page, we see this less often, but generally when we'll see sort of this aggressive commitment, the context is usually a prospect who has seen rapid increase in their overall compute usage, sort of moving up into the right, but then based on either business conditions or some internal engineering optimization project, their usage will dip down. And if the user was sort of aggressively stacking compute savings plans on top of each other, really trying to almost mirror the increase in usage, when that usage downturn happens, they end up in an overcommitted state, which you see there in red. And in the overcommitted state, the dollar value of the commitment you're making to Amazon and you're paying to Amazon exceeds the amount of actual on-demand usage you would have incurred if you had no commitments at all. And so really, that's a terrible situation. And the challenge with compute savings plans, as I mentioned, is because they are immutable commitments. When you are in the middle of your compute savings plan term and you end up in an overcommitted situation, you have no recourse. There's absolutely nothing that you can do, and you will basically overpay and waste money. So mechanically, this is the big driver of what's happening in the prospect base we'll see. In addition, what's not shown on this page, but is sort of a secondary element, is just the utilization of your instruments. Now, in general, with savings plans, compute savings plans in particular, utilization should be 100%, assuming you are properly committed. You're committed at a level below your usage. But in the event you have very volatile, high-frequency compute usage, and if you've committed too aggressively, you might find yourself in a spot where your savings plan is actually getting less than 100% utilization. So this is all of the trick with using compute savings plans and really using them to their maximum effect. Now, how ProsperOps goes beyond the savings plan and what we would sort of term supercharging the savings plan, and once again, this is an and discussion, not an or, is that we like to use compute savings plans and we pair them with convertible reserved instances. Now, you might ask, okay, convertible RIs were the predecessor of the compute savings plan. Convertible RIs do not cover Fargate and Lambda. They only cover EC2. Convertible RIs are also a region-centric commitment. So unlike the compute savings plan, which is global, the convertible RIs are subject to a particular region. So you might ask yourself, okay, well, why do you use the convertible RIs? Well, the hidden valuable impact of the convertible RI is that it's actually the only AWS savings instrument where you can change the commitment after you've made the commitment. And so when you use a combination of compute savings plans and convertible RIs balanced and wrapped with the appropriate real-time telemetry algorithms automation, you can effectively use the combination of these two instruments together to effectively track your usage up and down. And because you can control the convertible RI in terms of its dollar per hour commitment and in terms of its actual term, you can make this mirroring happen in a very term optimized way, because it wouldn't be particularly interesting if you use these convertible RIs and they required you to go make brand new 12 and brand new 36-month terms. But in the ProsperOps model, because we're dynamically controlling the convertible RI layer, we're able to go and really reduce the term of these commitments to literally 30 days at a time, almost a month-to-month experience. And so, in our model, we like to think about the compute savings plans as the base layer of commitment, shown here in purple on this page. And then on top of that, we layer in convertible RIs, which we call the flex layer. And whether you have existing convertible RIs or whether our service deploys them on your behalf, either way makes sense. And in fact, there's a lot of value if you already have convertible RIs. They're massive assets that you can unlock and take advantage of in our model. But it's the combination of those two instruments sort of wrapped together with the appropriate algorithms and automation that allows you to do this. And so in our model, what good looks like is, instead of the FinOps Foundation aspiration of 80%, or even worse, the reality of 60% coverage, in the ProsperOps model, we will allow coverage to get up to 95+% of your usage while maintaining near perfect utilization. And that includes whether your usage is increasing or decreasing. And so by getting high utilization, high coverage, with the ability to manage risk, and subject to whatever composition of AWS savings instruments you decide, whether it's 1 year instruments or 3 year instruments, that is really the equation and the calculation to go and maximize your effective savings rate. So when we talk about how do you get out of the 20% ESR range and drive yourself into the 40% range, it has to be through a sort of a combined commitment approach like this. Just not achievable with a compute savings plan only approach to all the limitations I spoke of earlier. So when you think about ProsperOps, think about really three things. Number one is, this approach that we're talking about here is one that will absolutely maximize the savings you're getting on compute. And, for the average AWS user, compute ends up being, let's say 60-ish% of the overall AWS bill. And so if you're able to generate effective savings rates of 40% or greater on 60% of your bill, that's something like a 24% decline in total. So first of all, this is a key to taking a big chunk out of your overall AWS bill. Secondly, because we are able to go and dynamically change and adapt the flex layer of convertible RI commitments, we're able to go and manage the risk of uncertain future infrastructure volatility. So as we showed in the previous slide, whether your usage is going up and you want to basically go and cover that incremental usage and generate a discount, but not do it with a brand new 12 or 36-month commitment, and do it with a more term optimized commitment, that is risk mitigation. And whether your usage is going down because maybe you're transitioning from EC2 to Spot, and you expect over time your usage to decline based on that transition to Spot, the use of a flex layer that mirrors the decline in usage every hour as it happens allows you to manage that risk and basically continue to save at very high levels while that is happening. And then finally, our service is an AI ops tool, as I mentioned earlier, which means that, we are not sending you reports. We are not sending you recommendations to assess, to act on, to stay on top of, to report on to other stakeholders in your organization. We are basically watching your environment in real time. We're seeing the changes as they happen. We're dynamically changing your commitment portfolio, manipulating the convertible RIs, forcing the compute savings plan to go in different spots. All of that is happening behind the scenes and is executed on your behalf 24/7 and reported on via our console. So many of our customers really focus on engineering optimization. How do I go and architect my environment for better performance, better outcomes. And what they know is that there is this financial optimization service just constantly watching from the side, seeing things as they happen, and then adapting and reacting to synchronize the commitment portfolio with whatever is happening in the engineering environment at that hour. And so all of this is sort of an autonomous experience. And we've basically gone and simplified the whole act of capacity planning down to just literally 4 variables that you control and have to decide. So it becomes very easy to go and think about risk, think about how you plan for the future, and then just let our service go and operate 24/7 in the background while you focus on all of the engineering optimizations that are valuable to your environment. Let me talk about what this looks like in practice. So what I'm showing you here is a prospect that came to us, and we're looking at their data through the end of February of 2021. Now, by the way, I'll say that this is analysis that ProsperOps offers. We have this free compute savings analysis. Literally, it's a very narrowly scoped IAM permission. It takes about 5 minutes for you to add it to your payer account. And then literally, we could be on a video call within an hour looking at your data historically. And we will calculate all of the outcomes you've been receiving based on whatever strategy you've been exercising over the previous 12 months. So not only will we help show you what you've been doing and benchmark you against your peers, but we will overlay our approach and our automation on top of your own data to show you what the before and after savings picture looks like. And we review that with you on a 45-minute to an hour phone call. So the ability to get the data I'm showing you here is literally about an hour round trip. It's extremely valuable. And once again, it's completely complimentary, no commitment to ProsperOps. So what we're looking at here is a prospect's trailing 12 months of spend. This data is not normalized. It's subject to fluctuations in days of month. And so you see that sort of moving around. But you can see here this customer over time had grown their overall compute usage to just over 600K in the month of February. And you can see a lot of red. That's on demand. So obviously on demand is the enemy. And historically, the customer had been using some level of standard RIs, which you can see in this purple sliver that more or less expired off here recently. And instead, they'd begun moving to a spot model, which you see in green, as well as the use of compute savings plans, which you see in yellow. And obviously, given the use of savings plans, our expectation is that this customer should be generating some reasonable effective savings rate. So, obviously, we see the current state of the world, and now we need to try to understand how were they actually thinking about using these instruments, capacity planning, et cetera. And what we can see on this next page is a view that helps us sort of get a apples to apples view of what's happening in their environment. So what I'm showing you on these purple bars is their overall compute usage. And to get these purple bars, what we do is we sort of normalize all aspects of the spend you saw on the previous slide. So for example, all of the on-demand spend is included in these purple bars. All of the discounted spend that they had from using these compute savings plans, we've reverted back to their on-demand equivalent. And then we've added that in. And we've taken into account days of month and normalized everything to a 30-day month. We've removed credits. We've removed bandwidth charges, any of the cruft in the AWS bill that makes it hard to really understand what's happening. And what this gives us is a very normalized view of what actual consumption looks like in their AWS environment. You can see that historically, it had been going up through September of 2020, up and to the right, massive increase. And then subsequent to that time, it had been dropping, and then it was up again in February. So you can get a sense that this prospect had been doing a lot of internal engineering optimization, et cetera, and had been seeing the product or the results of that optimization with lower consumption. Now, overlaid against those usage bars is a red line. And what we've done now is we've taken the dollar value of that compute savings plan commitment. And we've overlaid it in this red line. And that's to help us understand, okay, given the commitment that they've made to AWS, what does it look like in terms of coverage relative to their overall usage? And so you could see here that when they started this compute savings plan back in July of 2020, they probably had made a commitment that was relative to about 40% of the overall usage in that month. But you can see as you fast forward here to to February, that the actual coverage had dropped down to 27%. So their overall savings plan commitment was only 27% of their February usage. So obviously what had happened was that usage had way outpaced the incremental growth in the savings plans. And you might ask yourself, okay, well, why didn't they add more savings plans? And the answer was that they were anticipating declining usage in their environment due to these engineering optimization projects. And so they did not want to incrementally increase their risk profile by adding more compute savings plans, which would have raised the red line closer to the purple bar, because they sort of intuitively knew that if that usage in purple were to drop below the red compute savings plan commitment, the compute savings plans are full term and they are immutable dollar per hour commitments once made. And so they intuitively didn't have a way to understand how to think about risk. And the way that they were using the compute savings plan tool did not allow them to manage risk. So they hedged and they left more of that usage subject to on-demand rates. So now we go and we ask the question, okay, well, let's understand the impact on effective savings rate. And so what you can see on this chart is over the same trailing 12-month period, we can look at the absolute dollars generated from their use of instruments. And so the left axis is in dollars, and you can see in the dark green bars the actual dollar savings that were generated from their old financial instruments, their standard RIs. And you can see them dropping off in sort of the October-November timeframe. But you can see as of July, the light green bars begin to spin up. And the light green bars represent the dollar savings that were coming off of their use of compute savings plans. So that's all well and good. The absolute dollars are helpful. But what you really want to try to understand is what is happening with your savings power, because your usage is moving around on any given month. And that's why we calculate the effective savings rate, which is really the truth teller. It is the ultimate ROI metric for the use of these financial instruments. And you can see the percentage on the right axis. And you can see how effectively their ESR had jumped up when they introduced the savings plans in July to, let's just call it into the mid-teens. It had declined back down into the single digits, largely as usage had increased. And then when usage dropped, effective savings rate increased because their commitment relative to their usage was now closer. And it settled in February, roughly at around sub 10%. I think their 90-day ESR was roughly about 10%. So they were sort of in the 59th, 60th percentile of AWS optimizers. So obviously a lot of improvement could be had above and beyond their compute savings plan centric approach. And so what ProsperOps does is we model out for them taking the existing savings plan that they've already procured and they're already using, and it's already, they're already into the term. And we'll just say, let's not change that compute savings plan. Let's leave it as the base commitment as is. And then let's go, and on top of that, we will begin to add a layer of convertible RIs. And the convertible RIs, once again, are flexible instruments. They are malleable. And over time, the convertible RI is algorithmically grown or increased to just cover more and more of the usage. And because it understands telemetry from your environment, what's happened in the past, what's happening currently. It's a commitment that is elastic and can be reduced at any time, subject to certain constraints. It has all of this knowledge, and this is what ProsperOps wraps together. And so we're able to add this layer of flex commitment on top of the base commitment. And what we're showing here is if we just took that $613,000 of spend that this prospect was seeing in the month of February, and we just projected it forward completely flat into perpetuity, assume that they spend the same amount every single month into the future. We said, now let's go model out what the ProsperOps approach will generate in terms of savings. And so what you can see on this chart in the gray bars are the savings generated from, basically, the prior months of the 3 prior months of service, February, Jan, December, going backwards. So you can see where your savings were historically. And we threw out the month of March when we ran this analysis, since things were in transition. And then going forward, starting in April, you can see the savings that are continuing to come off that existing savings plan, represented in purple. And then in green, you see the savings that are coming off of the flex commitment. And what you can see here is that over time, the flex commitment is gathering information and understanding about the customer's environment. And even at constant usage, it is understanding the environment in a way that it can grow its commitment amount, generate more savings month after month after month, and ultimately, it will cover 95% plus of their overall usage. And so what you can see here is that this particular prospect, who is generally getting, I think in February, sub 10% effective savings rates, I think their trailing 90-day was roughly a 10% effective savings rate, ends up going immediately back up to 10% in the immediate initiation of service. And then over the subsequent 12 months, went from 10 to 20. And so in the first 12 months of service, you're now back into above the 75th percentile. And then over time, our service will continue to go through a series of changes that allow that commitment to ultimately generate a 39% effective savings rate, right? Which puts them right at, just right at underneath the 98th percentile. And on an incremental basis, that's roughly $2.4 million of annualized incremental savings to that user, above and beyond the savings that they were getting in the prior months. So you can see here how this approach can really take the benefits of a savings plan and then mitigate the full term immutable dollar per hour commitment by adding on an incremental layer of flexible convertible RIs that can be dynamically manipulated. And it's the combination of both of those instruments that allow effective savings rates to really go up significantly higher. So if you're interested in getting a sense of what's going on in your environment, you might be using savings plans already. You might be transitioning out of a historical portfolio of RIs, whether they're standards or convertibles. I will say as a side note, if you are using convertible RIs today and that they are, several months into their term and are coming up for expiry in the next couple of months or quarters, I will say that in our model, you have a very valuable asset. And those convertible RIs can be leveraged and unlocked immediately to generate tremendous incremental savings very quickly. If you have a 3-year convertible RI that is coming up for expiration in the next couple of months, you have basically the best situation possible to really benefit from not only very high levels of savings, but also high levels of risk management in a solution like ours. But if you'd like to begin to start understanding how a model like ours could impact your environment, you have a couple of options. Number one, we're always happy to jump on a call and talk about our approach and advise our prospects with regards to their existing strategy and how our model might incrementally improve what they're doing. In addition, I showed you an example of a prospect that had just recently gone through a complementary compute savings analysis. And so if you're interested in having one of these analyses run on your behalf, like I mentioned, it's a very least privileged, narrowly scoped permission that will pass muster at very sophisticated InfoSec organizations. And add that permission, and literally we could be on a call, an hour later, looking at your data, walking through and quantifying where you've been, how you compare, and what our service would incrementally generate in terms of savings and or risk management. And if you're just interested in staying in tune with what's going on with ProsperOps, you can subscribe to our ongoing updates. As I mentioned earlier, we just made a little bit of a counterintuitive posting about how standard RIs in many cases are superior to their successor, the EC2 Instant Savings Plan. You're probably not going to hear that from the friendly AWS rep, but nonetheless, when you sort of tear apart all of the elements of these instruments, they all have pluses and minuses, and really letting an expert like ProsperOps help unpack that for you can add a lot of value if you're interested in this. And then once again, since our service is an AI ops service, if you don't want to become an expert in this particular dimension of cloud cost optimization, the good news is you don't have to be, because that's what we do on your behalf. And we do it completely algorithmically in the background, 24/7, generating results that it would be almost impossible for a human to replicate, and provide effectively you a way to manage risk that you cannot manage on your own when you're using these various financial instruments off the shelf from AWS. Anyway, thanks so much for your time. We'll give you back 18 minutes to your day. If you have any questions, we look forward to hearing from you.